I'm a stats nerd. In fact, some might call me a bit of a dork. Or at least a dork wannabe. And being an AFL nerd is a bit of a pain in the ass. Unlike American sports, plays in Australian sports don't have a set value, but players don't have a set position with extremely well-defined roles. The more fluid nature of our game makes it harder to give apples to apples comparisons between players and to define a player's individual and absolute contribution compared to their unique style into a single number. Nonetheless, I've given it a go. My value over replacement player formula took me months to perfect and seems to be pretty broadly on the ball, if I do say so myself, even though it throws up a few surprises every now and then. I'll make details of how exactly these calculations happen available on my Discord and Patreon when I get those programs properly up and running. When I sort that out, it's a long, nerdy, boring explanation. This number, though, is the most important. If you score 0 in your position, you're bang average. If you score over 1, you are in the top echelon of the AFL, equivalent to, say, 2013 Jeff Garlett. If you score over 2, that's a certain best and fairest win, pretty much. Think Dusty and Dangerfield in 2017. If you score over 2.5, that's a Hall of Fame season. Think Marcus Bontempelli in 2023. 3 men have scored over 3. And if you're down in the dumps, if you've got a minus in front of your name, either you're not getting many games or you've got dirty photos of the coaching and selection panel. This is a great way of saying that, for example, Taylor Walker was a better forward than Joe Danaher in 2023, but this doesn't help me compare him to, say, Marcus Bontempelli in 2023, or hell, say Jobe Watson in 2012, to throw out a random example. Yeah, sure, it can tell me that 2016 Mitch McGovern was as good offensively as, say, 2018 Nick Haynes was defensively, but that doesn't take overall production into account. So I took the formula one step further and amalgamated the players' relative performance in weighted stats representing each position, which spits out one number. If you score between -1 and 1, you're average, congratulations. If you score over 3, you're an All-Australian, or at least in contention. If you score over 6, you're in Brownlow contention. And if you score 8 or more, you're on for one of the greatest seasons in history. I must stress that these figures do not say that 2013 Charlie Dixon was a better player than 2023 Tom
Atkins.
All I'm saying and what these numbers are saying is that relative to other players in their positions and the time that these players spent on the ground, Dixon was more valuable to his team over a player of a similar position with purely average stats than
Atkins.
I've been able to apply this formula to every player season in the 18-team era, and before I show you the best, I'm going to show you the worst because I know you want to see him. Charlie Constable. Remember him? He heads up a list of heaps of guys who played 1 or 2 bad games most often as the sub and were never seen again. As my formula multiplies by the inverse of time on ground, if you come on as the sub and don't do well, it sure hates you. Discounting them, let's take a look at every season of 10 games or more with a total VORP of under -5. It's very rare. To the end of 2023, it's happened just 65 times, a great deal of which are 2022 to 23 Roos and Eagles. Hello to Israel Folau, and yes, his still isn't even the worst season recorded in a Giants jersey. Hello, Aaron Cadman. Folau's close though. Anyway, here's every player season above 8 overall VORP since 2012. Slightly less rare, 69 occurrences, nice. Franklin and Hawkins topped the list in seasons where everyone else was a mere child compared to them. Dangerfield is the only man to hit 10 twice, which is just crazy, shows you how good he really was. A lot of the usual names appear up here, as well as Jed Anderson and Garrick Ibbotson. Again, if we take out the games played requirement, a few more little runs of greatness get sprinkled in. Daniel Wells, a man loyal GAZ-man viewers know pretty well, tops this list. Cameron Delaney and Reece Matheson, pretty serviceable players, appear either side of one of many injury-truncated Nick Naitanui seasons. Then there's Lance Franklin and Tom Hawkins at the very peak, which just goes to show how much better than everyone else they were in those years to have that sort of output across a whole season. Below them sits an unusual man. You see, everyone who's ever registered a season above 9 total VORP, even if it was in one cameo appearance, went on to be an AFL regular. Even Cameron Delaney went on to play in another season. There are a lot of good players here, a few future Hall of Famers for sure, and most of Hawthorn's premiership empire. Hooray. This man here, one of only 20 individuals with a total VORP above 10, didn't. In fact, this, a game in which his output was comparable with the very best player seasons of all time, was his only AFL appearance. Now you might be thinking, why is this absolute nerd going to talk about a bloke who only played one AFL game? He can't have been that special. That's probably lucky. Well, let's take a look at the full list of everyone to play only one AFL game in the 18-team era. There's daylight between this man and second. He is the only man who's come in one time and one time only, equalled Lance Franklin's peak production, and then just dipped. I have to talk about him. Allow me to introduce you to Luke Lowden. Luke Lowden was drafted by the Hawks in 2008 as a 17-year-old, taken at pick 63 between two of the most mediocre midfielders ever seen, drafted by two of the most disastrous sides of the AFL era. He was a ruckman who had the capability of playing forward. His only problem was that he was doing so in a three-peat Hawks outfit with David Hale as its main ruckman, the only ruckman to string together consecutive seasons of over 5 total VORP. Behind Hale, but ahead of Lowden over the years, well, there were a few. The veteran Robert Campbell, the talented but erratic Brent Renouf, the bland but capable Max Bailey, the weird hires that were Skipper and Johnson, and the young Brock McCauley? Really? Okay, well, speaking of players who used to play different codes, former basketballer Sam Grimley was knocking around as well. Collingwood reject Jonathan Segler came later with, of course, big boy Ben McAvoy. It was the hardest side to crack into, as Alex Woodward could certainly attest to, especially if you were competing with 3 very good players for one position. Pity, as those St Kilda and Demons sides would soon be screaming for a dual-threat 206cm giant. So while those sides were pumping games into dross like Mark Jamar and Billy Longer, Lowden was forced to sit on the sidelines, honing his craft. He was, by all accounts, a popular figure at the Hawks. He arrived with the typical underweight Liam McBean pole frame that young ruckmen carry, earning the nickname Sticks. He brought with him his passionate family from Shepton, who were known to those who frequented Box Hill games for bringing a big party bus. I've never seen a bad word written about him by those who've talked to him. He was a gentle giant, perhaps too much so. He didn't really have the required level of inner bastard to be able to brute force his way past Hale, McAvoy, et al., and a few fans had question marks about the physical aspects of his game, as well as the fact he kicked like an absolute mule, though he was noted for how well he moved around the ground. He also got injury luck about as good as you'd expect for someone who started their footy career with a team called Dookie United. Yeah, really. The Dookie Dasher was set for a debut in 2010 after a best-on performance in the VFL, but broke a bone in the base of his thumb. A patch of good form in 2011 was derailed by stress fractures in his back, and that's a big back to fracture. He also had battles with a dodgy shoulder, wrist, and the dreaded osteitis pubis. For a while, it looked like he and teammate Alex Woodward were destined to follow similar paths. But Lowden's body held together well enough to earn a chance, one it took him a hell of a long time to get. He was drafted on the 29th of November 2008. He played his first AFL match on the 7th of June 2014. 2015 days he spent on an AFL list without playing a single one until this. Day 2016.
Old mate Big Boy is on the injury list for a couple months, with David Hale putting himself in mothballs just 1 week ago. In steps Luke Lowden into a team halfway through one of the very greatest dynasties ever, acting as a second ruck to Segler. Combined, they have 6 AFL games under their belts, all belonging to Jono. So who are their opponents in ruck? Oh, only Dean Cox and Nick Natanui.
Oh, God, no.
This guy's fucking nuts!
Loyal GAZ-man viewers know who this man is. Dean Cox is the man I nominated as the best ruckman I've ever seen with my own eyes. As for Nick Natanui, well, across 2013 and 14, he only had T-Vorps of 7.77 and 3.5, and would go down as the 18th best player of this period. As for Dean Cox, even though my stats only pick up at the very end of his career, he still cracks the top 50. If you could pick any 2 ruckmen that you wouldn't want to face, unless you were Riley O'Brien, these 2 would be at the top of your list, not just for 2013, but across this entire span. Thank indeed. Luke Lowden was thrown into the deep end on that day in Tasmania. It was sink or swim, and Luke Lowden swam like Michael goddamn Phelps.
He scored 3 goals straight. This is already enough to get my VORP algorithm drooling, as it values outright scoring power and goal accuracy. He also had an assist and a further 6 score involvements in only 77% of game time, giving him an outrageous forward VORP among rucks of 4.09. This figure alone would be enough to give Lowden the highest overall VORP of any ruck in 2014. But we are nowhere near done. His higher than average disposal numbers, combined with elite disposal efficiency, which is incredible considering his VFL numbers, and elite stoppage contesting figures give him a midfield VORP of 1.98. Only Paddy Ryder and Todd Goldstein also exceed 1.4. Of course, each ruck dog should be measured by his ruck doggery. Lowden wasn't the best outright ruckman of the season, the best being... Luke Lowden. His insane 32.22 points above replacement mean that he is able to coast past average hit out to advantage numbers, as well as not taking a single mark to comfortably post the best rucking numbers of anyone, despite having similar ruck effectiveness to Mike Pike and Robbie Warnock. Ugh. Of course, it's not like he's also the best performing defensive ruckman according to these figures. Oh, he actually isn't. Thank goodness for that. He does poll relatively well here, and that's because a huge percentage of defensive VORP is based on points gained above replacement, which takes a player's offensive and defensive contributions, i.e. points scored and points saved in contested one-on-ones, and turns it into scoreboard points. I chose this over the simpler defensive-only points saved above replacement, as it also highlights a defender's own boot as a scoring weapon to help give rebounding defenders a leg up. This works well for like a Luke Hodge or a Sean Burgoyne type, but a guy who scores 3 goals in his only appearance breaks this carefully measured calculation like a Kit Kat. Lowden's 32.22 PAR again weighs in like a slacking Biggest Loser contestant, with his 1 rebound 50 and 1 turnover still placing him very highly among all rucks, despite only having 1 defensive pressure act and 0 defensive one-on-ones. 3 score launches also really helped his cause here, with no other player that season getting anywhere near that mark per game. He walks away with a DVORP of minus 1.09, which is about fair because he began a lot of scoring chains, but he didn't really physically defend much. This brings his TVORP down to a mere 10.66, one of the highest numbers I've ever seen, all because Al Clarkson sees a man score 3 goals on debut and thinks, you know what? Nah.
Lowden was soon traded to Adelaide along with future AFL ex-immortal Kyle Chaney, which genuinely excited me. I'd followed Lowden's story, and it seemed the Crows could really use a genuine backup for Sam Jacobs with proven goal-scoring potential. After all, the best spare ruckman we had at the time was Angus Graham. Unfortunately, Phil Walsh's death meant that a psychopathic idiot took charge and ensured Lowden was played as a key forward in the SANFL to further the development of young ruck Riley O'Brien, and I'm sure nothing will become of him. And I'm sure he won't score at a rate of a goal every 10 games, while the single most prolific scorer above a replacement level player rots away behind an office desk in Melbourne. Yeah, Luke Lowden was delisted at the end of 2016 without playing another AFL game, avoiding the ignominy of being on a list for 4 grand finalist teams whilst only playing about 70 minutes, and he never graced another AFL side with his presence again. Unfortunately, this meant that he missed out on the 2017 AFLX Premiership, which he could have shared with Kyle Chaney, and I'm sure that tears him up inside. At the age of 32, while Jonathan Segler saw out an almost perfectly average season with Geelong, the greatest player of the decade was sitting at a desk somewhere in Melbourne, hawking studio apartments. But sometimes that's just the way that the AFL goes. You get these stories sometimes of players who showed amazing flashes of brilliance, but for some reason or another it just didn't work out for them. Right place, wrong time. If Luke Lowden's out there, I hope that he has no regrets about the way that his AFL career turned out. It's given me quite a lot of joy compiling his career numbers and comparing them for you today, and I hope that if Luke happens to be watching, it gives him joy as well. I'm glad that you're part of the magnificent tapestry that is the AFL, Luke, and all the best to your future ventures. You join the weird pantheon of strange, fringe AFL cult heroes here on the GAZ-man channel. You join that pantheon with such great heroes as Kent Kingsley, Luke McCabe, Chris Hemley, Billy Frampton and Renee Kink. I love them all. Maybe not all of them. Billy's alright. He's a nice bloke. And so that's it. If you've got any weird niche players that you'd like to see a stats breakdown of, let me know and I'll, answer for you in the comments just how well and how weird their career went in my numbers. And I'll see you next time, which will probably be in a million days. God, my editing processes are terrible.